Hello there, welcome back. And in today's exercise, we're going to look at the uh, I- ideal proportions. And I have to say, I kind of hesitate by saying that because let's just, for lack of a better term, we could say the classic proportions of the human body, male and female. But these diagrams, not that one, these two diagrams are from Andrew Loomis's figure drawing for all it's worth drawing manuals, which were published in the early 1940s. And I do have to give credit where credit is due that Andrew Loomis's work was very pivotal in influencing many generations of artists. And his work is built, of course, on previous people who have mapped out the human body, like the Greeks and like Leonardo da Vinci. But producing these books in a modern format has been hugely influential. But I hesitate with some of the terminology because we know that the human body comes in so many sizes and shapes based on body type, based on gender, based on diet, based on different kinds of health issues, and that there's also a certain amount of gender fluidity that we now recognize between somebody who was identified male and identified female at birth. So, so take that with a grain of salt. I use these because they do have quite a lot of value in establishing basic proportions and how to measure things. But we know that there's more than one body type, so don't take that terminology too seriously. So a couple of things that I want to point out when we're looking at these is that in this one, in both of them actually, the body has been established at 8 head units tall. So you have the height of the head multiplied or stacked 8 times, in this case including high heels, and that the midpoint of that vertical measurement is just between the navel and the crotch on both figures. And if you look at the center line on the body in profile, how it kind of goes through the middle of the head, goes through the back of the spine, like the back of the torso, and then through the kneecap, and then in front of the legs. So there's this S curve here, and then another S curve here. What else can we notice? We notice that the head is roughly 2 heads wide, right? And this male figure, of course, he's more broad-shouldered than many other people, but he is 2 1/3 heads wide. Certain things are going to be universal to every body type, is that the muscles on the inside of the body, and let's look at the male, the muscles on the inside of the limbs, this calf muscle, and then this quadricep, and this forearm muscle, and the bicep, they all sit lower on the body than the equivalent one on the outside of that limb. So this calf muscle sits higher, this quadricep sits higher than this one, and then you have a forearm muscle here, this one, and then a bicep and a tricep, which sits a little bit higher. So some things are going to be universal no matter what body type. Another thing is that if a person was to lift their knee straight up, let's look at this guy in profile, and his hip joint is right about there. If he was to lift his knee straight up and kind of crouch over, then the knee almost always fits right into the armpit. So when you're trying to do your measuring, then just keep those things in mind. And you can always use a pencil to do basic measuring. Like if you line this up, then you can just take this unit and go, okay, that's this distance to this distance is the same as that, or the same as that, right? That being said, what we're going to do is copy these drawings, and as best as we could, lightly, and we can use the center line and this halfway point to help establish it as a grid so that we get the proportions. You could even break the entire height into 8 units and then fill them out one at a time, so that if you're using the center line for this body, then you'd have 16 little boxes to fill out. These characters are posed very stiff and straight, which I think helps for beginners just to get used to drawing out the body almost like if it was a machine. But this is not a natural way to stand because it's so stiff and straight. A more natural way, this is a little bit exaggerated, but a more natural way is if you look at anybody that's standing, waiting around, there's going to be more weight placed on one leg. And that's a term called contrappasto, which we first see in Greek sculpture. And it's Italian word, go figure. But in this one, if you look at the center line here that goes through the body from the neck, it goes right down to the foot that's holding the majority of the weight up. And you see the shoulder line opposing the neckline like this, right? So if she was to shift her weight to the other foot, then it would go like this. Because as soon as one hip comes up, then the shoulder on the same side drops down. Okay, so that is, I mean, this is a little bit exaggerated because this woman is either dancing or in some kind of a fashion show. But having your weight on one side, on one leg is supported more on one leg is a more natural way to stand. That being said, we're going to do this one, and because I think it's good for a beginner's exercise. I suspect that students might struggle a little bit with the face, but I don't want them to worry too much about that if they find that amount of detail is difficult. I don't want them to worry about it too much. Just do the best you can, and we are going to work on the face in a later demo. What we want to do is try to get the basic proportions of the body as broken down into this kind of a grid. And one tip that might help is if we remember that we're looking for the negative space sometimes, because you have a lot of different curves along here and you have a weird shape in here. So pay attention to this negative space. That's the space outside of the body. And its shape, because even though it shares the same shape as the body in terms of the shape of that line, that edge that they share, sometimes you can get a more accurate read of how that line moves and functions by studying the negative space instead of the positive space, right? So, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my T-square. If you don't have a T-square, of course, you can just use a ruler and try to establish it as vertically as possible. And I'm going to set up a line for her and then try to fit these all in. So I'm going to go like right about here, and the drawing on here, when I printed it out, is just about 8 and a half. Well, 8 and 3, 8 and 3/8 tall. But for simplicity, I'm gonna make it 8 feet. So let's see here. Right there. 8 inches, my mistake. Okay, and then I go like this. Go like that. Then about here should give me enough room to have all 3 figures. So what I did was I centered my 8-inch distance in the middle of the page, which is about 10 inches, and then I made this width 5 inches with an inch and a bit on each side. Okay, so then conveniently, now that I have this distance being 8 inches, I'm going to find the center point vertically at 4 inches. So I know that my midpoint is going to be about there. Okay. If you want to go ahead and split these up into different units, which I normally wouldn't do, but for a demo, I think it's appropriate. Right. 1, 2, 3. These can be very lightly drawn because they don't need to stay. But there is sort of an aesthetic beauty in a grid, so they don't have to be erased if you don't want to. When we go to put on clothes, which is the outcome of this drawing exercise, we're going to put clothes on these people so that they're decent to be seen in society. Then some of these lines might get erased. So I'm actually going to take my kneadable eraser and clean that one up. Okay. So some people have said in the past that they found it difficult to sketch without their hand rubbing on paper on their drawing, especially if it was something messy like charcoal. So as always, I recommend having a sheet of extra paper to cover your hand, because even pencil can smudge quite a bit. Okay, so the face, it's basically, I'll draw it large here. It's kind of an egg shape, like so, upside down egg shape. And some people have a stronger jaw than others, but it is still present underneath skin and fat and muscle. In this example, she's got a fairly squarish jaw. So there's a bit of a corner right there. And then the bottom is kind of flat, but kind of round. There's a corner here, there's a corner there, one there, and one there. But they get rounded off. And on many faces, though not all, the cheekbones are the widest point of the skull. And then you have, of course, ears on the outside of that. But this edge doesn't go straight up on many people. It comes out a little bit. And then you have the top of the skull. Okay. Halfway down is the eyes. You have a center line halfway down between here and here. I'm sorry, from here to here, halfway down is the bottom of the nose and then the mouth. So I will get into that in more detail in a future demo, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of help in establishing the height of the face. And those proportions are the same, obviously, for the face in profile, just that they're obviously turned. Okay, so let us get another clean piece of paper, just because it's less distracting to look at than the other one. And in the middle of my center line here, I'm gonna sketch my head. And you just always draw really lightly when you're trying to find out where something needs to go. You just draw super lightly. Okay. On the inside of the jaw, at least for this figure, is the neckline. If somebody's carrying a little bit more weight, then their neckline might be wider. Okay, so we know that the next, this is 8 head units, this is 7, and then the next one is 6, and it's just where the armpits are. So we need to be able to come down off the neck onto the trapezius, I believe. That's a little bit wide. And you have the collarbone. Now, I'm not drawing it exactly the way it is in there, but I mean, you should. I'm so used to drawing collarbones completely, but not every you don't always see them. So maybe I'll just erase that. I'm just so used to drawing collarbones by default. And you have armpits right here. Breasts. And keep in mind the center line. Look, I didn't get that quite symmetrical, right? So it's a good thing I did that, because it's a reminder to keep things symmetrical. So one of them is wrong, or maybe both of them. Let's start from the middle. Okay. Deltoid comes down lower than the armpit line right here. Rib cage. Where are we now? We are at the 5th head unit, which corresponds to just above the belly button. Okay. Let me see if my lines are being symmetrical over here. Not quite. So check which one do you think is wrong and adjust accordingly. So I think this one needs to come out a bit more. So what I'm doing right now is I feel more comfortable drawing the whole torso first and then adding the arms after. So this top of the pelvis, very important. There'd be no human life without it. And let's see here. Okay, belly button is around here, the center point is here, then the crotch is down here. Okay, are we keeping things symmetrical? Not really. So let's take my pencil and move this measurement over like this, go like that. Okay, so I need to come this far out. I was honestly thinking this woman looked a little bit on the skinny side, and not that I'm skinny shaming, but I'm also trying to be conscious that there is a long history of the male gaze, of the way women's bodies are depicted through history, and it changes from one period of time to another. In the past, I don't know, 80 some years, it's been in the West. There's a privilege of women looking skinnier, but when you look at our history in the Baroque and the Renaissance, women as depicted in art, in paintings, were very curvy, and I believe it's because people were poor, and so there was an idealization of the body that was plumper, because it was almost a fashion to have something that wasn't easily available, because there was a lot of poverty in Europe, and plumpness was desired. Interesting how that is, eh? Okay, so knees are above this point. I want to make sure that I'm on track here. Knees are just above this point. The second head height. And then he's got her in high heels. So there's an extra little bit beyond the bottom. Feet are challenging for many people to draw at first, especially because when you look at the body straight on, then you're seeing the feet in foreshortening. It's like looking at this pencil straight on or looking at this hand straight on. It becomes distorted. And when you imagine a foot of kind of the most idealized position of how to describe a foot, you see it in profile. So seeing it from the front is a little bit more challenging, and that just comes from observation and practice to draw them correctly from that angle. Okay. Just remember that on many people, the side of the hip has two bumps. You have one right here, which is the top of the pelvis, and then one right here where the hip bone, where the femur attaches to the pelvic bone. You have this part that sticks out right here. And it swoops in, calf muscle. There we go. She's a little bit, I've made her a little bit curvier than in this one, and that's fine. And I think, again, this breast needs to come out a little bit. Okay, how are we looking? The wrist ends almost exactly at where the crotch is, and then when the hands are hanging straight down in a relaxed position, then they fall, the tips of the fingers fall somewhere around mid-thigh. And hands are challenging to draw. You could have a whole nother demo or section on how to draw hands, but I just simplify it like this. I draw it from this position just because it's simple. Okay, let's check our proportions here. This one is about there, and if I go here, that is a little bit farther out. So let's check it again. Not by a lot. But it means that I should probably adjust the position of the head because something doesn't look quite right. Just the head goes here, there, so. There we go. Eyes about halfway down. As I said, I wouldn't fuss too much about the face itself because we're gonna get to that in a later demo. As long as you have the proportions up and down relatively close, you know, I've changed the body type here a little bit. That's what we're going for. We're just trying to get used to seeing the entire body in proportions to each other, in the various parts in proportion to each other. Okay. I don't want to make this video too long. I'm trying to always find a balance between giving enough information and making the video too long. So what I'm going to do for the profile and the rear view is I'm going to just sketch the basic shapes because I know the midpoint is here and her head is going to be here. And you can break this down into basic shapes like I just say for pretty much every single exercise. We are going to do the torso right here. So you can actually use this first drawing as a reference point because you want to try to keep each body part or body section the same height no matter how she's turned, right? So if the shoulder line is right about here, the rib cage comes out like that. It kind of leans backwards. And then there's an abdomen and the pelvis. The top of the hip pelvic bone is right here. And it leans backwards. And then you have a buttock, which is about here. And the pelvic bone sort of tilts forward while the rib cage tilts back. Then thigh comes out. The front of the thigh has one giant curve, but the back of the thigh has more of an S curve where it goes out a little bit and then in. It swoops into the knee, at the back of the knee rather, and then comes out again like this for the calf. So the general thrust of the thigh is a curve that goes this way, and then the general thrust of the lower leg goes the opposite direction. Okay, something to keep in mind. I like to draw the rib cage. Generally, I'd like to draw the rib cage and the whole body